Hello, I would like to talk about our town library. My name is Dick Gootall. I have been a regular user of the library since I moved here in 1968. These are my own views. I'm not representing anyone but myself. In this video, I'd like to share what I think are two predicaments facing our library and tell you about an opportunity to do something about it. So when I say our library's predicaments, I'm talking about the building. I'm not here to talk about climate change. I want to explain how that the building is putting the librarians between a rock and a hard place. How? To be plain, the library building is way too small. It has not for decades and does not currently have the capacity required to meet the needs of the community. It certainly won't have that capacity to meet the needs of the future. Yes, there is a lot going on in that small building. The library promotes a lot of its activities on its website, in the Cricket and other news media, in newsletters, on Facebook, and even on signs in front of the library on the sidewalk. But only one specific activity has received continuous daily promotion for nearly 4 months. It was that important. That activity was an invitation to help plan the next 30 years at our public library by completing a survey. I filled it out. Did you? I have no idea how many people did complete the survey, but I imagine its results are now being analyzed. That needs survey had one item that asked the survey takers to use this list of 28 items to check all the services they personally would like to see available at the library. Well, they called them services. You can think of them as event programming for small groups. Different groups for children, for teenagers, for young adults, for seniors. Groups. There were events listed in this all throughout this list where you just watch and listen, like movies, concerts, demonstrations, and speakers. And there are events where you verbally participate or discuss things. There's also a lot of hands-on activity events, some for learning and some for fun, like cooking, game playing, painting, and so much more. It happens that the library has done almost all of these things at one time or another. Stop into the library any day, especially weekdays, and one or more of these things will be going on. Or just look at the monthly events calendar on the library website to get the same sense of daily small group activities. Most libraries try to do this nowadays. These things were rare in libraries in my childhood days. Back then, they were special events, maybe one or two things like this a year. Now they are frequent, they're daily, in some cases, multiple times a day. It's actually an important way in which the idea of the library has changed over the years. So, how does this work out in our library with our current library building? Well, let's suppose a local author is scheduled for a presentation and question and answer period in the Hearthside room over in the east wing of the library, and at the same time, an art workshop for teenagers is scheduled in the west wing of the building. Now, given the fact that the library is currently one large continuous room with no closed doors in between. We know that sound carries from one side of the building to the other. You can see that the library is mostly limited to one activity at a time. It's clear that just one completely enclosed and dedicated meeting room would change that for the better. And two function rooms with doors would completely solve this predicament. And there are more complications regarding predicament number one, these services, because in addition to programming events or services for small groups, the library is still trying to fulfill its traditional services for individuals who come into the library building. Like what? Like to read something, to browse and find something, to work on something, to research something, to learn something, or maybe even just to meet someone. All of this, both of these services, programming for groups and traditional uses, are valuable. And it's a tribute to our remarkable staff that they keep trying to provide both. But then again, the predicament of our building, because generally, not always, but generally, these activities are going to be distracting to those trying to do these things. Again, with our current building limitations, it is hard to find a balance that works. Now, as an example, here's a meeting of the Mystery Book Club from the point of view of the guest speaker who took this photograph. Because of that group event, now, here are the consequences. The other library patrons coming into the building cannot count on using the Hearthside reading room to be available for quiet reading. To avoid disappointment, they'd have to check the calendar to see what's happening at the library on any given day and when. Okay, another thing is that library patrons cannot get to the stacks. So if they're in another part of the building, they can't get easily through here to where all the books are shelved without stumbling through the event, which is embarrassing for everyone. Ditto for anyone trying to get to the tiny, infuriating little bathroom. Nearly impossible. And meanwhile, it's difficult for the attendees to actually hear the guest speaker due to the proximity of the essential conversations going on in the circulation desk, which is in the lobby, and actually some of the people at this event are sitting in the lobby trying to hear the speaker over here in the Hearthside room. We are often trying to find that balance in the very same room. So, example, someone walks into the media and function room, formerly the reference room, to use a computer workstation to look up some information. He might find a group of teenagers having a block printing craft activity at his elbow. Now, will that individual just give up and leave with this commotion? Or, on the other hand, will the group instructor of the activity be distracted by the people coming and going to the computer workstations? Well, maybe there should just be fewer group activities in the library. Or should there be more? Finding a balance between these two types of activities is the great predicament. And it's caused by our small and inconveniently structured building. Having one or more closed-off meeting rooms, rooms with a door, is the solution. If we had function rooms, then balancing would no longer be an issue. With group events in a closed-off room, librarians can pursue their modern mission without conflict. I have told you about predicament number 1, how to increase programming and events, or programming events and individual use without conflict by adding function rooms to the library building. But predicament 2 is mainly about the lack of space to increase the library's collection capacity. Collection meaning books and other media and things. Let's put all of this into perspective by going back to our original benefactor, Mr. Coolidge, and his wonderful gift to the town, the building that became our library. I'm sure it seemed big enough in 1887 when the original collection of 3,000 books was moved into the east wing of that building. You might have been shocked, Mr. Coolidge, to learn that it only took 25 years to become a book collection of 15,000. And obviously, you could not see ahead into the future, and unfortunately, we cannot either. But 100 years after you built the library, in 1987, we had 46,000 books, and we have been bursting at the seams ever since then. There's just nowhere to put anything else. As media collections of DVDs, audiobooks, and other things grew, we've actually had to get rid of some of the books because we don't have the space. Now we have about 37,000 books. That's right, fewer books. And the only way to make shelf space for buying the latest, most popular books is to get rid of books we bought just 3 and 5 years ago and to keep weeding out the older books. Unfortunately, Mr. Coolidge, neither you nor your famous architect friend Charles McKim could have foreseen the predicament that our library is now experiencing during these last 35 years, trying to make our building work to meet changing needs. Because looking ahead even 30 years is so very difficult. But I feel certain, sir, that if you were here today, you would support Manchester by the Sea as it considers changes to your building. You, Mr. Coolidge, would probably be the first to realize that if we need to add at least 2 meeting rooms, plus more space for books and other collections, it really comes down to just 2 options. 1, we build a brand new library elsewhere in town, or 2, we reconfigure and expand the existing building, your building, sir. Well, clearly something must be done. It was just this past September that I first heard the library trustees were talking about a library expansion, and my reaction was, whoa, finally! I've been thinking generally about the need for more space in the library for years, especially the last 20 years. Well, it turns out my reaction was a little out of turn because I was out of the loop. I had missed the article in the Gloucester Times back in April of 2023, Manchester considers library expansion. But most importantly, I had forgotten, I knew about this, but I had forgotten about what really triggered this expansion activity. It was the wonderful gift from the estate of Ron Burrell for $500,000 last year. Thank you so much, Mr. Burrell. I think you helped to get the ball rolling. But we need to get real about this. Whether we end up building a new library elsewhere in town or reconfiguring and expanding our existing building, the bottom line is this: it must have at least 2 function rooms with doors. If we don't do that, we've completely wasted our money. We might as well just stay where we are. Do nothing. But that's not all. We should also be providing for additional space to display our collections and additional space for storing our collections, the so-called stacks. We certainly don't want to be putting it in the basement. Um, but even then, with these three essential things taken care of, it would be foolish to ignore these things that make the library convenient. The bathroom. Oh my word. We should upgrade that bathroom for sure. Everybody knows that. You probably don't know that the workspace for librarians is extremely cumbersome and inconvenient. You can't see it because it's out of sight, but it is very hard to access and very inconvenient. And as there will most likely be two floors in whatever we do, an addition, an expansion, a new building altogether, or even within our existing building, there will most likely be two floors. And therefore, we'll have to have safe stairwells and an elevator for access and for moving books and materials. And finally, if it is going to involve the existing building, then we, of course, want to maintain the historic features of the building. All of these things, all of them together, add up to a lot of money. Let's get real. It's a multi-million-dollar project. Okay? That's the reality. Now, the gift from Mr. Burrell is just a start. A big start, but there's a long way to go to pay for this. Now, before I tell you about the great opportunity I mentioned that requires immediate action from all of us here in town, it goes without saying that the town library, an important educational institution of our town, needs more major benefactors, whether that be a gift of land or a gift of cash. You know, in 1887, Mr. Coolidge, a town resident, this wasn't some far off, distant Andrew Carnegie, he was a town resident who stepped up and paid for the design and construction of the entire building. This project will need more people like Mr. Coolidge and Mr. Burrell in order to make it happen. Do you know someone like that? Fortunately, the library learned last year, and here comes the opportunity, that the State Board of Library Commissioners would be making building grants or construction building grants available in 2024 for the first time in several years. After this 2024 grant period closes and the application period is the letter of intent period is been closed, we did send a letter of intent, but the final application is due within the next few months. After that, the board will not be doing this again for several years. Wouldn't it be great to get a piece of that 2024 money to expand our own library? That's why the trustees engaged a consultant to help them navigate the complex application process for one of these grants. It started last fall with the state required needs assessment to get citizen input, which, once again, it's back to that survey I mentioned previously. And in addition to that, the consultant also conducted several focus groups in which I think maybe altogether about 50 townspeople participated. So that was the start of it all. But what kind of money are we really talking about here? Well, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts will give the town 60% of the eligible construction costs on a project of up to $5 million, or a grant of 45% of eligible construction costs on a project up to $10 million. Now, that is serious money, and that is why the Library Board of Trustees is making a serious effort to apply for this grant. Now, it's important to know this. The state library commissioners have made it very clear that the grants are only for towns that are seriously supportive of their own library expansion project. Therefore, the board requires the town to vote for an initial $150,000 expenditure for feasibility and design plans as a way to demonstrate serious support for a construction project. If such a article in the warrant or line item in the warrant is passed, we can continue to seek this grant. If it should fail, the grant is dead for years to come. The library ran out of space for maintaining its collection of books and media by the 1980s. Manchester is the only public library for miles around without a separate function or meeting room in the building. Over the last 40 years, library events have increased, but at the expense of quiet spaces. A modern library should be able to have a wealth of programming and quiet spaces. If you're as frustrated as I am with the limitations of space and services imposed by the existing library building, please help solve the library's predicaments. Go to the 2024 annual town meeting and support the library's request for $150,000 to make the grant application acceptable. This is a critical first step. A show of town support is required by the State Board of Library Commissioners. Let's not miss out on this rare grant opportunity. Go and vote. I remind you that these are my own views about the library. I'm not speaking for the trustees, staff of the library, or town officials. And most importantly, if I made any errors of fact, they're my errors, and I apologize. But thank you for listening, and please help solve the library predicaments. Go to town meeting and vote for the library expansion project.